If you mix drums and you don't check phase, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Possibly. In this video, we're going to talk about what phase is and how it can help you get a better drum mix in just one click. In fact, a little bit later in the video, I'll show you an example where one click turned a kick drum from being kind of meh to being kind of awesome. So what is phase? It works better if I show it to you first. So first, let's look at a simple waveform. This is a sine wave. It's very simple. It goes up and down. It sounds like this. This is the purest of sounds that we have available to us. And as you can see, when I increase and decrease the volume of this wave, those waves get spikier and taller. So the volume relates to the difference between this center point and the max peak here or the max trough there. Okay, so we're good so far. If this was silence, it would be a horizontal line. There would be no waves, but there is sound, as you can hear. Now, phase has to do when we have multiple waveforms. So let's duplicate this, and let's do something. Let's flip the phase of this waveform. What does phase mean? So real quickly, you'll hear the words phase and the words polarity used interchangeably. That's not actually true, but we're not going to get into that too much. The polarity has to do with phase and polarity when they're used interchangeably mean, does the waveform start moving upward or does it start moving downward? So we could flip this by flipping the polarity or the phase of this particular waveform. So let me show you what that would look like. Let's add a plugin called Mix Tool to this specific waveform, and we will hit this button, which stands for phase invert. Cool. And we will render what that just did. And you'll notice this waveform is exactly the same, except it's basically flipped. Instead of going down here, it goes up. And if we solo this and listen, we'll hear it sounds exactly the same. But the difference is when we try to listen to both of these playing together, something really interesting happens. What do you think happens when I press play on these two waveforms? You hear that? No, you don't. Like, check it out. They are both playing. I can see volume here and I can see volume there. But no volume is actually coming out of my mix bus. You can't. If I just listen to one, great. If I listen to the other, great. If I listen to both, silence. Why is that? That is a concept, a phenomenon known as phase cancellation. These two pieces of audio are 180 degrees out of phase. We essentially moved this waveform in time. So here, we can hear everything, but then back here, this volume goes negative while this volume goes positive, and they mathematically cancel each other out. The net answer, if this is negative 10 and this is positive 10, what happens when you add those numbers together? You get a big 0. So this waveform, the first one is completely canceled out by the second one. That means we get silence. Okay, now here's something I want to show you. I didn't have to go through all of that work to do what I just did. I could just duplicate this track. So it's two of the exact same thing. We should still be able to hear it. But then if I come over to the mixer, I could just click this phase polarity reversal button at the top of the channel, which if you're a Studio One user, you can see that by clicking the wrench and choosing this input controls checkbox. So if I click this button, the same thing happens. Muted, not muted. I'm doing the same thing. It's just actively flipping that polarity so that the two are now out of phase. So what does this have to do with us in our drum recordings? Anytime you record anything with more than one microphone, you open yourself up to the possibility of phase issues. That just means that the sound of, let's say, the snare drum is going to hit this microphone sooner than it hits this microphone. Why is that a problem? Well, it might not be a problem, but it can be a problem if those two waveforms happen to start canceling each other out. Now, what happens with a drum kit, it's not like the overhead mic mutes the snare mic when you play them together. That will never happen. But what can happen is a variation of that phase cancellation. So ultimate phase cancellation means you get 0, you get silence. It cancels every frequency all the way through the frequency spectrum. What's more likely to happen in a drum mixing scenario is that the two are somewhat out of phase and they're causing certain frequencies to be canceled. A lot of times what may happen is two tracks that sound good, like the overhead sounds nice and punchy, the snare track sounds nice and punchy, but then when we listen to both, it sounds thin and weird. What's happening? What could be happening is the waveform up here and the waveform down here are canceling at certain warm, delicious frequencies, so it causes it to sound as if you did a big EQ and you cut out a whole bunch of certain frequencies. Sometimes it's super obvious, sometimes you can't hear it at all, but you have to check because you could be literally fighting against yourself in the mix because your overhead and your snare track are literally EQing each other to cause it to not sound as good. But let's listen to it because I know this sounds like a math class and it's getting very technical. The technical stuff is just lays the foundation so you can understand, well, why is that happening? You don't have to understand it fully. Just know multiple microphones on a single performer can cause phase issues. It's worth checking. Same with two microphones on an acoustic guitar or multiple microphones on a drum kit or an orchestra or a choir. There's only a handful of things where this matters. Right now, this microphone on my voice, I don't have to worry about phase issues because I don't have another microphone on the same voice. If I did, I'd have to think about this. The first way you fix phase issues is with mic placement. You try to place the microphones in a place where the two playing together sound nice. But then, even if you do that, or maybe you forgot to do that, there's a little trick you can do whenever you mix drums, just to double check to see if there are any phase issues happening and see if you can quickly fix them by flipping the polarity. So like I said before, the way I've got my session set up, I've got these buttons across the top, and each of those buttons flips the polarity or flips the phase of that specific channel. So let me just take you through the process of how to quickly check the phase. It's not this big, hairy ordeal. It takes an extra maybe 5 seconds or 20 seconds at most, and you can get potentially amazing results by just making sure you've done this first. So let's listen to these raw tracks. I've done nothing but set the levels and pan a few things. These are raw drums recorded in this room. So here's what they sound like. So the first step is to remove any plugins if you have any. Start with the raw tracks, set your levels, get a good static mix going. By the way, that's a great part of the mixing process, get a good static mix. And then once you've got a decent mix, before you start reaching for your favorite plugins, go through and flip this polarity button for each track in your mix. And what you're listening for really is just kick and snare drum. Do the other mics on the kit interfere with the kick and snare? Are they making the kick and snare sound worse or better? Does flipping one of these polarities change the sound of the kick drum or the snare drum, or sometimes potentially both? Real quickly, these drums, just so you know, kick mic is on the kick, snare is on the snare. There are two tom mics. There's an overhead, a room mic. Crazy Tambo's we're not listening to that right now. And then there's this fat mic, which was a fathead ribbon microphone that we placed kind of over the kick drum, kind of looking towards the drummer. So it's above the kick drum, but like next to the snare drum. So it picks up a lot of kick and snare and ends up being a really cool sounding track. By the way, here's what that sounds like. It's just got this cool kind of flabby kick and snare sound, which is cool. All right. So now I'm going to listen. I'm just going to go through and push these buttons one at a time and just see, does anything sound better or worse when I do that? 9 times out of 10, nothing changes, it's fine. But occasionally, you'll get something that sounds really great. So we'll start over here at the room, and we'll work our way back to kick, all right? Just listen. Here we go. Okay, could you hear any difference? I'll tell you where I heard a difference. There was something going on with the fat mic, with the snare mic, and with the kick drum mic. But the biggest one, I think, was the kick drum. So let's just click this on and off and listen to the kick drum itself. How does the sound of the kick drum change? Here we go. I'll tell you what I hear. It sounds okay without it flipped, and then flipping it like gives it this extra octave in the kick drum. It goes from going boom, boom to going boom. It's got this extra, like literally this extra low end. Listen to it one more time. big, beefier. So by just flipping that polarity, I got a bigger, beefier kick drum sound. Now, when I do that, I want to double check and make sure the snare sounds okay, see if it needs to be flipped as well. So when it's a little different, it's a little thicker with it flipped, but it's not really changing my life either way. If that's ever the case, I just leave it alone. But this is a simple exercise you can do, and then you can go, once you've flipped it, you can maybe go through and flip again to see if any other flipping needs to happen. I didn't really hear any differences there. The main difference was the kick drum. And I believe it's the kick drum related to the fat mic, if I had to guess. But that alone changed. Now think about it. We just changed the sound of our entire drum mix by flipping the polarity. There were technically no plugins involved, and we just gave ourselves a beefier, better sounding kick drum. Is that not incredible? Is that not like the best news ever? Because sometimes you'll do this and it'll go from sounding like thump, thump, thump to boom, boom, boom. Sometimes it's that dramatic. Sometimes you'll do it and nothing will change. And then sometimes it's just two different sort of sounds and you pick which one you like better. But the times when it makes a dramatic difference, imagine if you forgot to check the phase. And so you're sitting here trying to boost to get some more low end out of this thing and you can't understand what's happening because when you solo it, it sounds one way. And then when you hear it with everything else, it sounds different. Oops, that was the whole track. And you keep going back and forth and you're scratching your head and about to pull your hair out, if you have hair, because it's not doing what you want it to do. This helps solve that entire problem. By the way, this whole phase checking process can happen during step 1 or step 2 of my 5-step mixing process. What's that? You don't know what the 5 steps are? Come on, get it together. Go to 5stepmix.com to get your free copy of my 5-step mix guide. It is simple, kind of beautiful, and will help you get incredible mixes in less effort than ever before. Go check it out. Couple of final points about this. What about virtual drums? Do you need to do this with them? I say yes, it's worth trying. Typically, I find virtual drums don't need any phase flipping. Someone already checked and did that, but it never hurts to try, especially if you've got a virtual kit that has kick, snare, and overhead that were ostensibly all recorded in a room with microphones. There could be phase issues. Why not check it yourself? Secondly, don't obsess over it. Don't spend hours doing this. It should be a quick thing where you click, click, click. That sounds better. I like it that way. And then you move on and you never touch it again. And finally, 90 to 95% of the time, I don't flip anything. I'll check it, but there won't be any difference, so I'll just leave it alone. Hey, if you like this video, double check and make sure you're subscribed. And if you haven't seen this video on an easy, simple way to mix drums, check that out next. Thanks for watching. See ya.